Welcome to Invisible Iceberg. On today's show, we explore the biblical story of Noah's Ark and weather's role. Plus, is the Bible the first to tell the story of a great flood? We'll reveal the answer. And we discuss the most devastating and costly floods in U.S. history. It all starts now on Invisible Iceberg. Today, we're diving into the iconic Bible story of Noah's Ark and its dramatic flood. Does this tale of weather's power represent ancient folklore, or could it be a reflection of real-life events? We'll examine how stories like Noah's Ark may actually be historical records passed down through the generations. This is just one of the fascinating stories explored in the book Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shaped History. Welcome to Invisible Iceberg. I'm Bernie Rayno. Joining us right now is AccuWeather founder and executive chairman and author of the book Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shaped History, Dr. Joel Myers. Dr. Joel, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, always.
All right. We're going to talk about a story that I think is very well known. Let's talk about the Bible and whether the Bible talks about weather and weather events.
It does, at least 31 times it mentions weather, and probably more than that. The best known one, of course, is Noah's flood, the seventh plague in Egypt, hail, but you can find references to weather in the Bible, but you find references to the weather in any historical documents and stories that are passed on, because the weather and climate had such an effect on humanity and threats to individuals and their survival.
Let's talk about the Great Flood.
Yeah, so obviously God said to Noah, a great flood is coming, and prepare for it and build a great ark. And he did, and put pairs of the animals and probably plants and so on to survive. How did God tell him, or how did he have a suspicion that this was occurring without getting into the religious aspect? Clearly, the ark was built, and a lot of animal life and humans survived a tremendous flood. Now, maybe glaciers were melting. It was about the time that we were coming out of the Ice Age. And clearly, there was enough time, months or maybe even years, to prepare for this flood. Others, very skeptical, thought he was crazy and so on. But it was it must have a lot of support, because it was huge. It had the volume of 1/3 of the Titanic. And remember, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. It was a terrible flood. So it might have been a glacier, it might have been added rain. Remember, he sent off the raven, and then he sent off the dove, and they kept coming back, which meant they couldn't find land. And finally, on the third attempt, the dove came back with an olive branch in his mouth, indicating the dove brought it back from a land area, and it was time to find that land and start humanity over.
How does the biblical text play into this belief, that is, that a flood did occur?
Undoubtedly, a flood occurred, and it was passed on, of course, and it's in the Old Testament, and a lot of details about it, and it certainly influenced a lot of religions, and there's a basis for it. And the fear of a flood and what it means, and how God warned Noah, and the power of God to know this was coming and provide this forecast. And Noah and the people and the animals on board survived. And there's a lot that represent a lot of things in history, how humans got through these crises and these challenges by the environment and the weather and climate to be alive another day.
Well, thanks, Dr. Joel. Lots of great information on the big flood. Stick around. Coming up in a few minutes, you'll be joining us again with our What If segment. Here with more perspective on this biblical weather event is Dr. Tremper Longman. He's a professor, theologian, and distinguished scholar of biblical studies at Westmont College. Thanks for joining us again today, sir.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Bernie. Thanks for having me.
Was the Bible the first to tell the story of a great flood.
We think it wasn't the first. We have a very similar story in something called the Gilgamesh epic and references to it in other Babylonian texts. And indeed, the flood is first mentioned in a mid-3rd millennium Sumerian text. The story of the flood in the book of Genesis was likely based on oral tradition that was passed down through the ages.
Is there any evidence that the biblical story is based on a real event?
My own view is that what you have in Genesis 1 to 11 is referring to historical events. And of course, the flood stories in Genesis 6 to 9, it is referring to real events, but it's using it's giving a figurative depiction of them. And in the case of the flood, it's using hyperbole. And probably both the Gilgamesh epic and the biblical story, and perhaps even other flood stories, were inspired by a very dramatic event in the past that imprinted itself on the minds of the people who survived it. And as one example, we know that there was this dramatic flood around 5500 BC at the end of the last ice age that created the Black Sea and actually separated Europe from Asia. And perhaps an event like that imprinted itself on people's minds, and then they, interpreted it from their theological perspective. That's one way to think about the reality that lies behind the flood.
What role does the biblical text and the theological significance of the story of Noah play into scholarship?
Yeah, I mean, it plays into scholarship by reflecting on what is the theological message which is being communicated by the flood story. And here I think we'd find more unanimity among scholars, no matter whether they think it's literally true, figuratively true, or mythological. It's clearly talking about human sin and God's judgment on human sin. But perhaps maybe even most importantly, it's also talking about God's grace in that he doesn't completely eradicate humanity, but he gives it a second chance in Noah and his family.
Noah's flood story includes scripture, faith, and myth. As a biblical scholar, how do you combine that with today's knowledge to find the reality about the flood?
Yeah, so my own view as a biblical scholar is that indeed it takes faith to believe the story, that there's a reality behind it. It can't be proven through scientific methods. There is a mythic quality to it in that myths tend to tell us about ourselves and about God in a kind of foundational way. And so there is a combination of faith, myth, and reality as we encounter the story of the flood in the Bible.
Here's a tough question. Meteorologists try to plan and warn others about upcoming weather events. When Noah prepared for the flood, was he an early meteorologist?
Well, yes, and let me say how much we all appreciate meteorologists who prepare us for, but I would say that Noah's anticipation of the weather, of course, was based on divine revelation, something that you all probably won't appeal to, but rather more scientific methods. There's an interesting passage in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus says, when people ask him for a miraculous sign, they say, the saying, red sky at night means fair weather tomorrow. Red sky in the morning means foul weather all day. So I don't know how far back that kind of, folk meteorology goes, but yeah, it is interesting to think about Noah being the first weather person.
Yeah, as they said, red sky at night, sailor's delight, red sky in the morning, sailor's warning. All goes back, perhaps, to biblical text. Dr. Tremper Logman, professor, theologian, and distinguished scholar of biblical studies at Westmont College. Thanks again for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up, is the Bible the first to tell the story of a great flood? We explore. But next, we reveal the most devastating and costly floods in U.S. history. Welcome back to Invisible Iceberg. I'm Bernie Rayno. It's time for our What If segment, and we're back with AccuWeather founder and executive chairman and author of Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shaped History, Dr. Joel Myers. Thanks for joining us again here. So let's get into this. Are there other sources that tell stories of a great flood? Just not the Bible, right?
Yeah, of course, Noah's story in the Bible. But there, in other cultures, there are just about every culture has a story of a flood, and a lot of people have drowned and died in floods, and it's a threat. And it's been in history, it was a tremendous threat. People didn't have any forecast, any warning. Torrential rains would occur. People lived along streams and rivers because they needed water, and they may have died in a flood while they were sleeping, or just couldn't get out of the way, or maybe there was a tidal wave. So floods have killed hundreds of millions of people over time, tremendous loss of life. And so it is a fear, a great fear of humanity. But there are some examples of prophets in other cultures that said this flood is coming. We need to build a ship and something to be able to survive the flood. And of course, those are the stories that survived and where people were saved. We don't know how many other prophets may have said a flood's coming. It didn't come, but we just know that it's not only Noah, but there are other stories like that.
So we have a lot of stories from a lot of different cultures. What does science tell us? Is there evidence that this great flood actually took place?
Yeah, there is. The Noah flood, it was in the cradle of civilization where we've been able to pass on things. It's in the Old Testament, and there's evidence of the flood. And not only that, there's been artifacts found in different places that may represent the actual flood that's talked about in the Bible and Noah. But there's also evidence, of course, of other tremendous floods in other parts of the world that have been lethal. In most cases, people were not prepared for the flood. And
your research in the book, when you were looking at extreme and severe weather events, what are some of the biggest floods that come to your mind that we know that happened? Well, just in the last 100 years or so, a terrible flood when the rivers in China flooded in 1931. Between 1 and 4 million people died. 1 to 4 million, just like 3 or 4 million people died in one flood over a period of a couple of weeks along the rivers. And that's been the last 100 years. We know also that there have been major hurricanes in the Indian Ocean just in the last 100 years that have killed over 100,000 people, in some cases perhaps as much as 500,000 people with one hurricane. Right. And so we know floods have killed in the last 100 years well over 10, maybe 20 million people on the planet. That's a lot of people. And so you go back further where you had no communication, no warnings of any sort. And the death toll has probably been enormous because there have been, if you go further back, enormous storms and tidal waves and tsunamis and all types of events that just probably wiped out entire areas, entire countries, entire islands.
Hundreds of millions of people died in flood since humanity started walking the earth, I have no doubt.
And even today, with the warnings and all of the advanced weather forecasting, flooding and inland flooding and flash flooding is still something that kills today.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, it's a major cause of deaths from hurricane, not the wind. But modern forecasting and the success, as Nate Silver says in his book, The Signal and the Noise, weather forecasters, meteorologists have made more progress in prediction than those in any other field. He looked at 100 fields. And so we can all be proud of that and our legacy. And of course, AccuWeather has been part of that, and our ability to warn people and have superior warnings. There's no doubt that we've saved tens of thousands of lives, maybe even more when you look around the world, because the kind of storms that used to kill even decades ago hundreds of thousands of people now do not, because people get warnings on their cell phone. Even in some of the poorer areas, we get these to them. So this is great progress. Let's celebrate. We were saving over decades millions of people that would have died, that used to died even 70, 80 years ago.
And with the warming planet, there is strong belief, and I knew you personally, that these flooding events and these rare record rainfall events are going to continue to be a problem.
Well, yeah, because as the Earth's temperature warms even a little bit, it can hold a lot more water vapor. The amount of water vapor in there doubles, capacity doubles every 20-degree increase in temperature, so about 7% for every degree, and that's pretty dramatic. So that is why we're having some all-time record rains, particularly in certain storms and so on. So no question, the extreme events will be more frequent.
And one final question that's interesting. Did a biblical flood story lead to the name of the U.S. government weather agency? NOAA,
N-O-A-A. Spelled differently.
Yeah, feels differently,
but
right.
We don't know for sure, but I suspect it played a role.
Interesting. I did not get the connection with that, but NOAA
I've always known
and NOAA.
Yeah.
That's a little uncanny, isn't it?
Well, I think it was by design.
Well, it was the Great Flood, and interesting. We have story and science coming together. Thanks so much for telling us the story, Dr. Joel.
My pleasure. Always, these are fascinating, and we both enjoy them.
We really do. After the break, we reveal the most devastating and costly floods in U.S. history. Welcome back to Invisible Iceberg. I'm Bernie Rayno. Flooding is one of the most devastating natural disasters, causing significant economic losses and loss of life worldwide. In fact, the World Bank estimates global flood losses could reach $1 trillion annually by 2050. Floods come in various forms. River flooding occurs when rivers overflow due to excess rainfall or snow melt, such as the Nile's annual floods and the 1993 Midwest floods in the U.S. Flash flooding happens suddenly due to intense rainfall, common in mountainous and urban areas. Water can rapidly rise, sometimes in just a few minutes. Now, examples include the deadly flash flooding in St. Louis on July 24th, 25th of 2022, and New York City during Tropical Storm Ida. Now, coastal flooding results from storm surges from tropical storms, hurricanes, but also during non-tropical low pressure areas such as the March 1993 superstorm. Usually high tides or king tides, sometimes occurring under blue skies, also can result in serious coastal flooding in cities such as Miami. Ice jam flooding occurs in colder regions. Ice jams block river flow, causing water to back up and flood surrounding areas. In March of 1936, ice jam flooded areas across Pennsylvania, New York, and New England, resulting in $5.5 billion in today's dollars and 107 fatalities. That's our show for today. For more information and get your copy of the book Invisible Iceberg, When Climate and Weather Shapes History by Dr. Joel Myers, go to InvisibleIceberg.com. And a big thanks to all of you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, send us an email at questions@AccuWeather.com. Thanks for watching.